Welcome back to Business Line. Rajiv Lula brings us part 2 of the discussion on IPOs.
Thanks, Pranav. Last week, we started looking at IPOs and why investors go for them. Here are some terms that you need to know before you decide to invest in an IPO. Aarti Krishnan, Head of Research at Business Line, joins us once again to give us some tips and pointers. Welcome, Aarti.
Hello, Rajiv.
So, Aarti, unlike a secondary market, this primary market has a lot of jargon of its own, bid price, band prices. Tell us what exactly are these, if you could define a few of these jargon things for us.
Typically, IPOs are of two types. You can have a fixed price offer or a book-built price offer. The basic difference between these two is that in the fixed price, the company says, I am offering my shares at this price. Say XYZ company says, I have 1000 shares on offer at 100 rupees. So, investors can take it or leave it. Now, the book built offer is an offer where the company says, I am offering shares in this price band. That is, he gives you a minimum price and a maximum price, and he allows the market to discover what the correct price for the IPO should be. So, who can make a fixed price offer and who can make a book built offer is not left to the choice of the company, but is actually decided by the regulator. Now, SEBI says that if a company has a 3-year track record of profits and meets certain net worth criteria and so on, they can go in for a fixed price offer. A company who doesn't meet these criteria should go in for a book built offer. In a book built offer, a certain portion of the shares on issue are reserved for institutional investors like mutual funds, foreign investors, insurance companies and so on.
So, let's take a deeper dive into book building. Sounds like an interesting topic. What exactly is it?
The company is literally trying to build its book. Book building works much like an auction. Just like in an auction, the seller sets a minimum reserve price for the article he is offering. In a book built offer, the offerer sets a minimum price for the share that he is offering, and he also sets out a maximum price. Now, investors are allowed to just bid any price between the minimum and the maximum limit. Say India Bulls Power, which was a recent IPO, it offered shares in the band between 40 and 45. So, as an investor, you can choose to bid at 40, you can choose to bid at 45 or anything in between. So, based on how you evaluate the company and its prospects, you can put in a bid at the price that you deem fit for it.
Right, now that's very speculative as well. Does that make IPO investing, again, I asked you this question, riskier than the secondary market?
It certainly does. Also because, as I mentioned in the book built offers, the offerer really doesn't have to have a financial track record. In fact, many of the offers in recent times have come from power companies which are planning to actually commission their projects, say in 2011 or 2012. So, that does involve a projection of cash flows. You need to know what are the returns that a power project may generate, say 5 years down the line. So, those are the more tricky in IPOs to invest in. Of course, you do have IPOs where the company does have a record and it is planning to just expand its capacities and raises funds for that. So, you have both types of IPOs. It is for the investor to choose which suits him better.
Interesting. Now, IPOs seem to have so many quotas and reservations, some of those you just lined up. Now, how do these work?
Yeah, in India there's no getting away from quotas, whether you go to colleges or schools or even elections. In IPOs, the reason for having the quotas is that the regulator wants to ensure that not the entire IPO is offered only to retail investors, because retail investors may not be in a position to evaluate the IPO completely and comprehensively. So, what they specify is in book built offers, 50 to 60% of the offer size has to be reserved for institutional investors. Now, what do you mean by institutional investors? These are basically the mutual funds, insurance companies, the pension funds, the foreign investors who take exposures to stocks. So, once these people put in their bids, the idea is that retail investors who bid will also have a reasonable idea of how to value the company. So, 50 to 60% is a quota for the QIBs, qualified institutional buyers. 35% is reserved for retail individual bidders, and another 15% is reserved for non-institutional bidders. Now, what is retail institutional bidders? Any individual putting in a bid. Now, if you apply for less than 1 lakh to an IPO, you become a retail institutional bidder.
Now, that's 1 lakh, not shares, it's 1 lakh rupees.
1 lakh rupees. Anything less than, more than 1 lakh makes you a non-institutional bidder. So, the 35% plus 15% is what is reserved for individual bidders. 50% also is reserved for qualified institutional bidders.
Now, as in the secondary market, you need a demat account to work in this market.
Right.
Primary market's no different. How do a FDI kind of get into this market though? I mean, do they have a demat also?
Yeah, foreign institutional investors have something called sub accounts, or they are registered with the SEBI, and they can trade through the domestic brokerages or their own brokerage arms. So they can put in the bids through that mechanism. Individual investors can simply apply through a hard copy of an application form, or they can take the online route. In fact, that's a very good development. In the last 1 or 2 years, many of the brokerages offer online platforms where you simply click and apply to the IPO. So that will ask you many questions. It will ask you how many shares you want to apply for, what is the price at which you would like to bid, and so on. So you can simply click and apply to an IPO.
Interesting. Now, these markets are also very speculative. I mean, demand and supply pressures. So besides the underlying business or its future prospects, the price is also dependent on how many people go and try and buy these shares.
Right.
So how does an investor protect himself or herself
Yeah.
against those speculative trends?
It's difficult to do that, but the good part about book-built IPOs is that the offer is open for 4 or 5 days. Four days is the minimum number of days it's supposed to be kept open.
Ah, okay.
So, and you're allowed to track the progress of the offer as the auction happens. So you can actually see the bids coming in for the offer. Suppose you can do this on the National Stock Exchange or the BSE websites itself. So as soon as the IPO opens, an investor who's keen on investing in the IPO can just keep track of how the bids are coming in. If he finds that the offer is struggling on the first 3 days, it may be a good indication that the appetite is not so very high. The second good thing is that with these quotas clearly delineated, the investor can find out whether institutions are bidding for the offer or not. Now, the caveat here is that institutional bidders are always not a good indication for what you or me should do, because the risk appetite of that guy is quite different, and he may just decide to bid on the IPO so that he can make listing gains or sell out on listing. So, that can be one indicator. If you are also able to do some due diligence on the business in the meantime, the QIB portion also can give you some indicators as to whether institutional investors fancy the IPO or not.
Great. Now let's also switch gears and talk about allocations. Is allotment in an IPO assured? What decides if I will actually get an allotment?
It's not assured. The allotment procedure depends on the amount of response an IPO gets. In India, if you see the the IPOs which are launched in bull markets get subscriptions for several times the shares on offer. So you will find these numbers like 180 times subscribed and 100 times subscribed. In those kind of IPOs, your chances of getting allotment are relatively limited. Because it is clearly set aside, of the 1,000 shares on offer, only 350 are set aside for retail investors. Suppose the retail portion gets subscription for 3 times, then you are likely to get allotment for 1/3 of the shares you applied for. So, the rules of proportionate allotment apply to IPOs. So, what the regulator says is, for people who apply to the IPO, you have to allot them equally. I mean, you cannot make any, the company doesn't have any discretion in deciding, I will give allotment to this person or this person. They have to take a scientific process, divide the subscriptions by the shares on offer and give proportionate allotment. The other thing is that it depends on what price you bid at. Since this works like an auction process, suppose you put in a bid below the price at which the company finally decides the price, you will not get allotment.
Aarti, thank you for laying down the rules and explaining all the jargons to us. Thank you for being with us today. Pranav, back to you.
Thanks, Rajiv. Join us on the other side of the break to meet a young entrepreneur who believes that the future lies in renewable energy.